Welcome to the Sisterhood in Politics podcast, the flagship podcast of the Consortium for Intersectional Justice. Sisterhood in Politics features women who engage in transformative politics in their local communities, producing work that also carries much comparative interest way beyond their shows. Many people talk about parity and women in politics. However, honest conversations about what it means in concrete terms to have women in positions of political power and influence are relatively rare. What kind of politics would women do differently? Answering this question is a key mission of Sisterhood in Politics. So my guest today is an exceptional woman who needs no introduction in global health spaces and also in the unceded sovereign territories known as Australia. Professor Chelsea Watego is a prolific author, a Black liberation leader, and an advocate for justice and self-determination for her people. Chelsea is a Mununjali and South Sea Islander woman and Professor of Indigenous Health at Queensland Institute of Technology at Meanjin, and is also the Executive Director of the Karumba Institute. I have the pleasure of sharing space with Chelsea as a fellow commissioner at the Lancet Commission on Racism, Structural Discrimination and Global Health. Chelsea, it's a great pleasure to host you and a very warm welcome to Sisterhood in Politics.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and your very kind words.
It's a great pleasure, Chelsea. So, Chelsea, we see the public figure, we see the author, we see the woman who tirelessly advocates for her people, especially in the area of healthcare, but also broadly speaking on concerns surrounding self-determination. Let's go to where this all began. Can you tell us a bit about the community you come from, where you grew up, and your early influences that would have motivated you to choose the path you eventually chose?
Yeah, because I certainly don't feel that where I am now was the path that I had chosen and that I worked towards getting here. And I found myself here for various reasons. I grew up as the youngest of 4 children to a white mother and cosmetically apparent Aboriginal and South Sea Islander father on the outer suburbs of Meanjin, also known as Brisbane. Working poor. We lived across the road of there was 4 lanes of traffic and a train station, and on the other side was the foundry my father worked in. And so we had a strong sense of race and class and the reality of it. Dad being read as a black man and my mother as a white woman, but also, living on the outskirts of the city. And my father working his way out of the foundry floor to become a truck driver, which was his passion. We had a strong, I think because of the South Sea Islander influence, we had a strong Christian influence in our home. And the sense of social justice in Sunday school parables was something that spoke to me, that appealed to me, despite the problematic nature of Christianity as a religion and as an instrument of oppression amongst us as blackfellas. There was something in the messages around social justice and, and winning against all odds. So I was nourished by those stories, and we grew up with a sense of our blackness. We knew the reality of it. My father was very honest with us about this, the task of racial socialization, of being aware of how race works, not in a way that would stop us from doing what we're meant to do, but as a motivation to do it in spite of. And so we grew up with this mantra of always, you never bow your head to them. You'd be 10 times better. And we never had a sense of black lack at our kitchen table. Even though we were poor, we were led to believe we were wealthy, we were rich in family, and that material wealth was not something to aspire to. And so my father was deeply disappointed when I said I was going to university after high school. It was expected that I was working part-time as a checkout chick in high school, and it was expected that if you finish school, you just go full-time, and that the sense of real work. And he was deeply disappointed that I said I was going to university at 17. And he'd said, places like that aren't meant for people like us. And it wasn't because he had this limited imagining of the capabilities of his youngest daughter. Throughout my career in the academy, I've fully appreciated everything, the significance of that line. The way in which my intellect, my contributions, my work gets erased every day because I'm not meant to know. I'm not meant to be a knower. And so it prepared me for the reality of the place. I didn't go, well, I'll go to university and become a professor and I'll transcend my racialized and gendered location. I had and even from my first few years in undergrad, I just turned 17 when I started university, and I learnt that we were a sick people, that we were dying, and it was news to me. I didn't know that we didn't care about our health or our families. I didn't know that we needed white people to save us. And at that time in the 90s, in Indigenous health in the colony, this is when the epidemiologists emerged with the appalling health disparities discourse. Prior to that, Indigenous health was ignored by public health in this country. We were destined to die out. So Indigenous public health is relatively new. It arrived in my generation. And, all of the people that taught me in an Indigenous health-focused degree were white epidemiologists who were the knowers of our reality. But I had lots of blackfellas who I studied with who contested and fought, and I got to witness senior blackfellas contest that violent knowledge in the way in which my father at our kitchen table insisted we contest. So I feel very blessed for the journey that I had to know that their account of us is a joke. It's not to be taken seriously. I think that's helped me to have a career in the academy in the sense that I'm not coming here to be able to recite their account of us. It is to contest it at every turn. It is not to get accepted in. It is, I understand the political function of intellectual work, particularly in a settler colony for blackfellas. And I found a place to do real work in the academy in a way that my father probably hadn't imagined was real. But I know most definitely he'd be very proud of, because I have maintained that sense of never bowing my head, never thinking that I was inferior, and never believing that knowledge that has been produced about us. And so, yeah, I found a way to do some real work and real intellectual.
Bless. I mean, that's really interesting what you're saying, Chelsea, because those ideas, right? The ideas that were inculcated at a young age to never bow your head and to stand your ground and to advocate for what you believe in. It's something very important. In this podcast, we talk about women engaged in transformative politics. At the beginning of this year, we had the pleasure of hosting Senator Lidia Thorpe, and a big shout out to Lidia as we speak. So Lidia Thorpe has the same approach, right? Similar approach to politics, similar approach to public life, where, no, you're not going to mess with me kind of attitude. I think that approach is very important especially to Indigenous women, young Indigenous girls anywhere in the world, and to young women in general, because in a very patriarchal society.
Yeah, right? I mean, it has protected me, but it's exposed me to violence. It is a violent position to stand your ground, to refuse the account of you, because you won't get the fast-track career pathway.
You won't get the
You won't get the institutional awards. You'll be excluded from certain tables. Your work will be extracted by others and presented in a palatable way, because you'll be one of those ones, too radical, too political. And it's interesting, my father, I don't think he would see himself as a political person. He He worked in a foundry. I mean, he didn't finish high school, didn't get to go to high school, and worked in the meatworks and the foundry, and ended up being a truck driver. But he knew how power worked. He knew how, and he found a way to exist within it in a way that he could provide for the 4 children at home, despite all those barriers. And so, you know, he was my first teacher when it comes to understanding race.
Teacher, absolutely.
You know, and but he wouldn't say that. I don't think he would ever cast himself as political. And it's just funny that for me, when you find yourself in this framing of radical and political as though it's a slur, as though it's something to be ashamed of, and I think about Tyrone Hamilton and Black Power, and talking about Black Power as this revolutionary idea that Black people can do things. I don't know what's radical about the proposition of, you know, believing in Black people. Because it's just it's the truth that I know. And what it seems to me is like absolutely irrational to not be able to see the capabilities of Black people, to completely erase that. And those that uphold that position are the ones that get rewarded, even other Black people who uphold white supremacy in order for the rewards that it offers. And so I just find it a really bizarre place that I'm like, am I radical? I mean, I work in an academic institution. I write papers. I'm not sure that's too radical. I mean, I do more than that, but, you know, the ideology is cast as radical.
Absolutely. It is so true, Chelsea, because the academic sector, your dad was absolutely right to say that it was not meant for people like us, in the sense that it was meant for white settler people in the context of Australia, white Australia.
To produce knowledge to sustain their position in the hierarchy.
Absolutely. In the context of white or Pakeha, New Zealand, in the context of white Canada, that category of people are the people for whom this was meant for. So you come in and you produce a body of work, original work that's true to your heart and that's true to your lived experience and that's true to the wisdom you bring to the table. And that wisdom is tagged as radical, as too much, as too excessive, because you don't fall in within their agenda. So I also have the same problem when I talk about decolonizing peace building, decolonial feminist approaches to international relations. Sometimes in certain quarters it is appreciated, but in many quarters I'm perceived as a certain troublemaker because I ask critical questions about, for example, people who do anthropology, right? A lot of these disciplines have this thing where, now I come from Sri Lanka, and there are so many Sri Lanka specialists in Western universities. Now, these people, they don't speak my language. They don't speak the other language spoken in Sri Lanka, Tamil. They don't speak Sinhala. They don't speak.
They're the knowers.
Exactly. They don't speak Sinhala. They don't speak Tamil. They've done some research, reading some stuff in English and using a translator to do whatever quantitative work they've done. And then they publish their stuff and they become the absolute experts. Now, you challenge them, then you become a problem. Now, even the body of work you have produced, Chelsea, now 1/4 of that, if a privileged white woman from one of those leafy suburbs of Canberra, if she had produced that, she would get a load of recognition, Order of Australia kind of recognition. So the academy is one of those places. And I gave a paper in NARM earlier this year at a conference hosted by the Australian Institute of International Affairs. And in that paper, I said that I'm not here to entertain, to facilitate the way in which things are done in this system. I'm here as a disruptor. It's very important to articulate what kind of positionality you represent, and that you're very conscious of how things are done in that space, the way your dad noted, and at the same time stand your ground. I fully agree with you that it's a very tough place to be in, where you would be excluded from a lot of tables. You may not necessarily get all the invites for all the edited volumes, all the laurels of the academy, and because it's a very politicized space, right? Because we talk about sisterhood in politics, being in academia is also being in a very political space as well, because whether you fall in line or not determines how far you get to go and how comfortably or uncomfortably you get to go on your journey. So thank you very much for sharing those perspectives, Chelsea. I think it's very useful insight to younger women who try to enter these sectors. Chelsea, moving on, can you tell us what you mean when you said, and I quote, the emancipatory possibility of not giving a fuck? In your 2021 book, Another Day in the Colony, once again, in Another Day in the Colony, 2021, you say the emancipatory possibility of not giving a fuck. So, epistemologically, and also in terms of praxis, in terms of the practice of decoloniality or decolonial feminism, this concept that you've developed is very important. Hence the question, what exactly did you mean when you said the emancipatory possibility of not giving a fuck?
Yeah, look, it's a journey that I arrived at. It wasn't a cute catchphrase, although it does sound cute. But it's a place I arrived at after taking on race and gender discrimination challenges against university, a former employer, the Queensland Police Service. And over the course of my career, I've worked with a lot of people dealing with race discrimination, primarily in employment, but in a range of different spaces, and watching that journey, including that of my ex-husband who, had to retire as a black police officer on medical grounds because of the racial violence of the institution he was working from. So early days, in knowing my black self, and the possibilities of black people, I was in a reformer camp. I was that you become not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So, some decades ago now, it was about being part of a system and transforming a system. And we're superhuman, so we can do it all because we're 10 times better. And I got to see my ex-husband became a police officer after I got locked up in country Queensland, working as a health worker, just walking home one night. And he was a former football player and was like, what do I do after I play football? And he became a police officer. And we returned to the community. He grew up in Inala, in the outer suburbs of Brisbane, same side of town that I grew up in, just sort of a few suburbs over, and it's a very proud, staunch black community that his family lived for some generations. And so he came in wanting to, change the experience of blackfellas encounters with police. And, I've since on the abolitionist journey, so it's some time ago. But I guess I just want to be clear that some people think that positions of abolition or nihilism are just kind of irresponsible. I have learnt about the violence of hope as a political strategy for people of colour. So I've seen blackfellas try and outperform racism. And if they just handle it better, they can overcome it. And I've seen the violence that it wreaks in black homes because it found its way in my house for my family. My ex-husband became unrecognisable to his children because of the violence of having to put on this just to withstand. And so there was a violence in hanging on to the hope of fixing things or trying to perform for our oppressors in order for them to treat us better. And so, I've had this stubborn curiosity about justice, not so much peace, but freedom and what that feels like. And when you let go of having your self-worth defined by oppressive systems and structures, that's freeing.
That's freeing.
That's freeing. And so it meant I had to revisiting as a political strategy. I mean, I got in a lot of trouble for my position on hope, particularly for some black feminist race scholars, because we've been taught hope as a discipline. For the uncivilized, who've always in need of disciplining, that has a different feeling for us as blackfellas here.
Right.
And my colleague, Dr. Amy McGuire, just noted recently as we were talking about it, she's like, yeah, it's a lot of work to do for hope. And look, I grew up in church, so I understand faith. I know faith. But hope for me has meant a lot of people hang on to really violent relationships with employers, with all kinds of colonial institutions. And I see, that's why we have such high rates of hypertension, diabetes, and some of the highest suicide rates in the world.
Right.
There is freedom and letting go of knowing that racial violence is theirs, not ours.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just not going to entertain it. And so when the chapter Fuck Hope is followed by Be Sovereign, what is it to act on our terms? And that's why, I
Right.
have so much regard for Senator Lidia Thorpe. She embodies that Fuck Hope, Be Sovereign.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy position to take up,
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been writing this piece at the moment on the logic of love and
Mm-hmm.
living with hate, but without hope. And making sense of this is that in that freedom, particularly for Black women who find that place of freedom in positions in these violent spaces, she will be hated, like hated, in that how
Right.
dare you kind of way. She should have put on the
Mm-hmm.
blazer and done all the things and that everyone else has done more to get where she's at. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been playing with Wicked as a device
Mm-hmm.
because, the Wicked Witch was never wicked. It was the propaganda machine had to construct her as that because she had a power that they could not control.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I'm using Wicked at the moment as a text, as a frame to think through the violence that particularly sovereign Black women encounter. If you're a Black woman in a position of power that's affecting change, you'll be hated the
Mm-hmm.
most. You'll be the most wicked woman of them all. And
Absolutely.
I had to learn to live with hate. I had to accept hate as a friend in my life, an unwanted friend. And some people are really scared of hate, scared of being
Mm-hmm.
hate. But if we're going to affect change, you're going to have to learn how do you live with that.
How do you live with that? Absolutely. And Chelsea, can you say a word about your experience of building support networks and surrounding yourself with the right kind of people, especially the right kind of women? Now, Dr. McQuire, who gets to work with you, who has the privilege of getting to work with you, I'm a bit jealous because I wish I had the possibility of sharing space with you at the Karimba Institute. And so building those support networks, surrounding yourself with the right kind of people, the right kind of women, especially, and getting to know your people, getting to connect with your people. That's very important, right? That is where you get that much needed support network, that much needed space of comfort to face that hate and to hold your ground and to keep focused on your journey. Can you tell us about your strategies of finding your people?
Yeah, I think about the Crumbra Institute here, the Institute for Collaborative Race Research, which is our private race research institute that we've developed, and also in Alawonga, a community development organisation that I founded and has been in operation now for 20 years. Each of
Mm-hmm.
these entities that I've been involved in the formation of have all been founded on values. Before you
Mm-hmm.
find your people, you must determine what your values are and be explicit about them. So we've had the Anala Manifesto, but this was the kind of research that we were doing. We were like, we're going to form our own field. When we're on the margins, we're going to find our people and we're going to form our own tribe. And there's so
Mm-hmm.
much joy at the margins of things. And I think people often forget, they try and think you'll get to the center, to the top. And once you're in that position of power, you can do all the things. And the closer you get to institutional power, the less power you have to do anything because you're
Mm-hmm.
part of the machinery of that institution. The moment I stepped into a professorial position on my Twitter account, there was all kinds of surveillance about what I could and couldn't do versus being an independent scholar versus being a director of a
Mm-hmm.
research institute. So I was like, well, that cracked up to be. But each of the things that I've been involved in building have had a clear value statement that have been formed with the people in that space. And all those values have been formed through struggle. Not the kind of values of, rainbows and sunshines and the purity politics of, policing and protecting our innocence and virtue. It's making clear, like, the Inala Manifesto says we're here building up research that are courageous, that are going to take on the state. We're very clear on what that means. In Cromber Institute, we have our Black Knowing values, and there's joy in Black Knowing, and we recognise the humanity of Blackfellas in everything we do. And so that values framework has helped build community too, because people watch and go, I want to be part of that community because their values align with mine. And in both, like, Anala Wonga, it's a not-for-profit that's never received operational funding. It just does community work so very differently. Like, we run a football club, do every wake in the community, run a play group, run a justice court system for our alternative court process for our community, do all these kinds of things. No other service like it, but it's existed for 20 years. Because we've been clear about the values we operate from, and people, when you come to work either ICRR, Kurumba or Nalawongra, it's not a job. You're there because you believe in the cause.
Yes.
And so I tend to attract people who are less about career and more about the cause. More about the collective and something bigger than ourselves. Not that we don't help advance people's careers and work to scaffold and do that kind of thing, but first and foremost, we're here because we believe in the work. It's not a job that we're turning up to. We believe in this work. We embody the values of these different spaces. And that, I think it's been really good because it for people who go, actually, you know what? This isn't my thing. And it's really helpful to people to opt into a community or actually opt out and go, you know what, I don't want to be courageous. I just want to go to work and do my thing. But that roll call kind of thing, or working out which group, we need to be explicit about values and not presume that we all share the same values. Because that's when we get disappointed, because we go, oh, I thought we were all about that. So I think that community comes through shared values. And so the people that I roll with and work with, I mean, Amy, Dr. McGuire was an independent journalist who came to do a PhD with me as part of a DECRA I had that was Indigenous health focused. But what's a journalist coming to do a PhD supervised by a public health person? We had, we could see the relation between the values that underpin the work. And she was looking at disappeared, or missing and murdered Aboriginal women. To me, that's a health issue. This fits with public health. This is a public health crisis. And so it's through the values that underpin the intellectual work that we undertake that we get a more expansive community that transcends the disciplinary divides that we've been disciplined to think of ourselves within. So in our team, we have, literary scholars, race scholars, political scientists, legal studies, journalists. We have, and individually, people bring this unique way of thinking about a particular issue, but collectively brings a much richer understanding. And so I think about Institute of Collaborative Race Research and the colleagues that we just built it because we were academics that didn't have employment. Back in, I think it was 2020, COVID and Black Lives Matter. And we went, well, we'll just form our own place to do the work, because I was getting requests to do work, but I couldn't work. And we have, political scientists and so it's called the Institute of Collaborative Race Research, and we do a number of expert reports, particularly for, increasingly, sadly, deaths in custody or disappeared Aboriginal women. And the state always struggles with the collaborative component.
And Chelsea, this collaborative institute, is it within the Karumba Institute or is it separate from the Karumba Institute?
It's a private company that we built. I was in the middle of my race discrimination case, and I was on leave, writing Another Day in the Colony as it happened. And so I was on extended leave, and my other colleagues who worked at the same institution were also experiencing violence in their various spaces and didn't have employment. But I was getting requests to do work around race and racism, but my institution didn't like it. So we decided, well, let's set up our own institute. And we've been in operation for 5 years now. We have a community organising space in South Brisbane, and we do intellectual work that informs a range of legal and political agendas that academic institutions perhaps are a bit more not as supportive of.
Mm-hmm.
It's this work where we've done a lot of our community building around Blackfellow Palestinian solidarity, but our work around parental inquests, public submissions, taking on the state,
Right.
and so it's where our most fierce intellectual work, and I think most useful intellectual work, has sat outside of the academy, and not
Right.
because it wasn't scholarly.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the violence of academic institutions and their
Absolutely.
resistance around intellectual work that is has a research impact beyond what they can imagine, that
Mm-hmm.
fuels transformative social movements.
There we are.
So we do things like reading groups, different activities, film nights. It's about building the community beyond the academy. And we do a lot
Mm-hmm.
of public information stuff around how to understand a particular issue. You know, when the Queensland government does something around like suspending human rights and youth justice reforms, then we'll hit with,
Mm-hmm.
this is what this means, this is what it's about, this is what we should be asking for. So it's really about community building for a cause, as opposed to building a CV within the academy. And it's stuff.
Very
So it's
good.
voluntary work. We do it outside of our day job, um, and yeah, but it's we do it because we believe in it. And I guess this again comes back to values. It's about what you believe in. So I don't need
Mm-hmm.
fucking hope. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have values that ground me and guide me in the work that I do, and it brings me into community with people who share those
Mm-hmm.
same values. So we don't have to have the fights about who does what, or because we come
Mm-hmm.
together through those values.
Values that actually guide a revolution, because what you're doing is very much revolutionary. You're building something outside those white supremacist, colonialist, patriarchal structures.
And this
You
is
know,
the thing, like we've been taught to believe that you've got to get in to affect
mm-hmm.
change. And it's
Right?
like, what if you just build? Like, this is the freedom of not having hope, is that what if you just create something that someone hasn't even imagined possible?
Exactly.
And to do that,
100%.
you can't have hope. You have to believe in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to believe in your power in order to do that.
Yes,
Again,
yes, yes.
our community organisation, Narrawonga, are we're the highest proportion of Indigenous people in the city of Brisbane, one of the poorest, most high density public housing. Our little black organisation has existed for 20 years, and we have not been given state or federal money for operational costs, but we've existed
Mm-hmm.
anyway. The Institute for Collaborative Race Research, look, I'm a terrible capitalist. It doesn't make money. We don't get government grants. We're fully independent, but we exist and we do the work anyway, and we just find a way to do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I just, so influenced by Saeed and representations of the intellectual, of the freedom that
Right.
can be found at the margins. Um, and yeah, you won't get loved up by colonial institutions, but why would you want to be?
Why
Why
would
would
you
you want
want
to
to
be in
be?
that toxic
Exactly.
relationship?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
No.
The set of ideas you just shared, Chelsea, it's a shared vision. It's a shared dream to many women of color, many women from indigenous communities, and even in politics, right? Creating those spaces that are genuinely ours. That is the struggle, right? To me, engaging with what bell hooks used to call the imperialist, capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy. So sometimes we are indeed brought to engage with those structures, but at the same time, what does it mean to live in structures that are ours, in structures where we get to do things in a more liberatory, more caring, more nurturing way with our people at the center.
Yeah.
So I think
And I,
that's,
and I think
yeah.
about someone like, we had a really challenging year this year. We had the Murdoch Press come for us, having convened a national
Hmm.
anti-racism symposium, and we were under attack. And what I loved about coming to work each day is the bubble that we have created.
Right.
I loved coming to work because the people I work with. So all that violence that was coming in, we had each other. We had our values, and that
Hmm.
helped us. And I was just so proud of our whole team who held the line, because we can talk about values when everything's going great. But when people
Hmm.
are about the values when everyone's against you, and you've got to stand in them
Absolutely.
values. And, for the last, I would say to the team, when the sun is shining, we've got to make the most of it. But in the academy, there's always different seasons. And so while things might be good now, winter is coming. And it's going to swing.
Right.
I don't believe in this idea of progress and that it's this incremental thing and we keep getting up, higher to something. No, settler colonialism doesn't work like that. We'll get this and they'll swing it back that way. And we've got to, how do we get ready for when it's time to run, we run. And when they come for us, how do we hold, in that space? And those values hold us, but it is a test. Not everyone, when you do this work, and not everyone's up for that, and that's okay. So I've had to think about not being judgmental, but it will show the greatest test of your values is when everyone's against you.
Absolutely. 100%. So, Chelsea, Senator Lidia Thorpe visited the Queensland Institute of Technology earlier this year. And she delivered a speech. And this was a closed door event, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, right? It was a closed door event. And this speech that Lydia gave to an audience, mostly of Indigenous people in the sovereign territories we know as Australia. This speech caused a lot of controversy in white Australia, right? A lot of people didn't like what Lydia had to say. And could you share with us what happened here and why did within inverted commas, Australian media establishment, why did they get so upset about what Lydia had to say?
Well, the scandal erupted the day before. And the day before, we, as a pre-conference event, we hosted the Great Race Debate, or as I refer to it, the greatest race debate ever. And I got people who are negatively racialized to get up and give their best race take. And it was such a joyful experience. But we had Nasa Machini from from APAN. We had Sarah Schwartz from the Jewish Council of Australia. We had people who, are under the eye of the Zionist lobby here in this country. And so in the lead up to that particular event, there were some complaints and concerns raised about Nasser in particular, his appearance at the event, but also Randa Abdel Fattah, who is a Palestinian academic who also appeared at the conference. So they saw the list. It was like Blackfellas, Palestinians, Black people. It was a gathering of people who were committed to doing anti-racist work, and it wasn't just academics; it was activist artists. It was we all brought a community together that wanted to deal with particularly state-sanctioned racial violence. And so it was an anti-racism conference. But we kicked it off with joy because that's one of our values. So we had a group of people give their race takes, and it was hilarious. But we had a Zionist infiltrator who would share on that first day a slide from one of the Sarah Schwartz, one of the Jewish panelists, and she's a lawyer. Would take it, like I know people say, take it out of context, but suddenly people didn't understand satire. And Sister Lorna Munro, staunch Redfern girl, comes from a staunch Black activist family. She did her joke was around punch him in the throat. Her answer to solving racism was, punch him in the throat. And she told the story of dealing with, the private white racist schoolboy who called her a slur, on the bus, that she punched him in the throat and he never said a racist word to her again. Here's my evidence. And so it was all like joking. And so we gave people who are negatively racialized a moment of joy in their analysis of how race works in this country. And it was amazing. So that day, the Zionist infiltrator recorded elements but took a screenshot of a particular slide of Sarah Schwartz, and so it was targeted. But of course then when they look at the conference program, there's Randa, there's Sarah Saleh, Lidia Thorpe, there's a whole the lineup was amazing to get these people all in one room. And we had some like our OG blackfella activists that were in the room. It was so much power. And so then they know the clickbait with Lydia because the hatred directed towards her. So they could attach this label of, this is a festival of hate. I think that was
Exactly.
literally said in one of the articles. And so there were calls to, dismantle Kurumba. We were put before work was put before a Senate inquiry into anti-Semitism, where there was a suggestion an article I'd written in the Conversation was potentially anti-Semitic. And then we were subject to a 6-month-long independent inquiry from a retired judge who investigated whether we'd done something wrong. And if you read the recommendations, while we were cleared of not being racist in convening an anti-racism conference, there were questions about, the judgment, my judgment, or lack thereof, and daring to hold a gathering which was part of a Centre of Excellence bid for a national anti-racism agenda in this country. And we experienced all kinds of violence in that process, things that I still can't speak publicly about. But yeah, it was the convergence of a whole range of things, and Lydia's been front and centre on the national platform around Blackfella Palestinian solidarity, around standing up against state-sanctioned racial violence. So of course you come, she's our alphabet in the colony.
Absolutely.
And even the caricaturists you see who cast as like a witch. The media representation. So I'm working on a discourse analysis of her representation and comparing that to the framing in Wicked and how we see the machinery of that, and how there's no escape from it. And the question then for women of colour who are insistent on effecting change, how do you find yourself having a relationship with hate, knowing that the work is a project of love? Because if you're scared of being hated, you'll then do your best to be liked, and that work will be sedated and domesticated and all but useless.
Absolutely. And it is what happens to a lot of women out there.
And then how do you keep your sanity in the process of it?
What you said earlier about having the right value system and surrounding yourself with the right people who uphold those values, I think that support system is extremely important as well, right? In facing those challenges.
Well, particularly when there's times where you might forget who you are in the process of hearing the accounts of you. Like I know when I was going through a race discrimination case against the Queensland Police Service, I got locked up and assaulted in custody, and they lose the footage in the watch house. But through the complaint process, I had to revisit repeatedly the transcripts of their sworn testimonies, the authority, the weight of authority given to the lies that were clear lies that didn't line up with what was on the footage, and but even approaching the account is itself a form of violence. And I had to think about, if I'm going into that account of me, how do I protect myself so I don't believe it? And lots of victims of racial violence, because of the nature of racial violence, come to believe the account of themselves. So if we're going to be against racial violence more broadly, then we've got to work out how do we navigate that ourselves at a personal level. How do we not take on the account of who we are in the course of this fight, the account that they have of us? And this is the danger of wanting to be liked in doing transformative.
Absolutely.
Because you'll forget who you are. And you can't do race work. You can't, if we think about racialized and gendered violence, you can't do it over there as a racialized and gendered, someone who's negatively racialized and gendered. You experience it too. And I don't want to do the self-care and center the self and it's all about me, but we're in relationship with that work, and we've got to think about, well, we're not immune to the racialized and gendered violence we're studying. But also we can't be the center of the story of the work that we're, that when we're doing work of service to others as well. So there's this fine line that you've got to navigate between how you make sense of the violence that's being enacted upon you as you're providing the analysis of the violence that's playing out.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if making sense, but it's something I've had to really, and so I can't sook about the racialized and gendered violence I experienced in the course of doing this work? Because of course, this is the exact thing I'm doing. How did I think that being professor means I'm not going to cop that? So I've had to temper how much I get, my lip hangs and I feel sorry for myself and go, okay, when I get them hits, no, well, this is also why you do the fight. So stop
This is
sulking
also why you
about it
fight,
and
yeah.
don't try and self-care your way out of that shit. What are you learning in that moment? What are you going to do about it? Because if you don't know how to do it, then you're useless to anyone else. So I'm really
Right.
conscious about modelling what I say. I don't. The reason I took on 2 race discrimination cases against my employer and Queensland Police, part of it was, if I'm going to do work around racism, then and I haven't fought it, then who am I to tell anyone else what to do with it?
Correct.
And we have some race scholars in this country who really lecture the rest of us about not citing the theorists and dismissing our work. But I know when I yarn with victims of racial violence, I know the feeling to not want to open the document in the email that you've got to then write an answer to. I know what that feels like. I can't read about that. I know what it feels like, so I know how I've got to be for that person and turn up for them. And to assure them that they haven't failed and not being able to just, reading their employer's violent letter about them. Anyway, so I'm going a bit of a ramble and monologue, but it's, I've had to really
It's
about this stuff this year.
it's an explanation as to why you do what you do, right? And I think those concepts, those points you raised are really, really very important. Chelsea, now moving on, we touched on this, but to revisit this idea even more than your academic work, what has had the most profound impact is your public-facing work, right? So we talked about some of your public-facing initiatives, and would you consider yourself, or would you consider your work to have a decolonial feminist outlook?
I don't really do decolonial. In this, I don't believe I'm anti-colonial.
Right.
And because people have wrecked decolonization, wrecked it to make it mean almost nothing. In a settler colonial state, I don't know how we can speak about decolonization or post-colonial moments because the settlers haven't left, and the violence is ongoing, continuing, finding new formations and ways to express itself, but it's the same bullshit effectively. And the danger in the state-sanctioned decolonial efforts.
Yes.
I mean, I don't police Blackfellas' use of the term decolonization. If people are saying, well, I'm decolonizing, then all power to you. For me,
I'll forward to you.
I don't think I can be decolonizing in an academic institution. I mean, working as an academic in an institution like this is no different to working as a police officer on the street. Same violent institution. One's just more obvious than the other. So I see myself as anti-colonial, and that the work is always about the constant fight against the violence of settler colonialism, and that it's an ongoing war that we're just picking up the spears that our ancestors left for us, and that we need to arm the next generation and the next generation, next generation. If we are to imagine Indigenous future as we're supposed to, that's the big thing, Indigenous futures, which I have a problem with. Indigenous futurity, how aspirational. That future is a future of an ongoing fight, and we need to prepare train our warriors for that. Feminists. So I, Professor Jackie Huggins, I think it was in Sister Girl. And she's in conversation with Bell Hooks many years ago. And she talked about her reluctance around being cast as a feminist. And she said, she uses the line, as a cosmetically apparent Aboriginal woman, I'm more likely to be oppressed on the basis of my race than my gender. And this idea that to be at odds with Black men, and not that that's what feminine exclusively has to be, but when we think about, traditional Aboriginal societies around, patriarchy came over on a ship. It wasn't here
Right.
before. Patriarchy was on the ship like the category of the Aborigine was. These are
Mm-hmm.
constructs that came over and were imposed. And when we think about return to an Indigenous humanity, we had gendered roles. We had different ways of thinking about gender that weren't hierarchical because we were not a hierarchical people and we were not a people of conquest. When you look at that language map across our continent, 40, 60,000 years, we were a people of coexistence. No one tribe sought to take over another's territory,
Right.
impose their language on. There was coexistence because we are relational people, we're not configured around hierarchy. And that spirit, that sentiment, is still very prevalent in so many of our communities today. This relational way of being. That's why we acknowledge someone else's country that we're on. Why we say, "Oh no, I can't criticize them mob because they're different mob." It's that respect of coexistence. If I don't agree with it, but I can't speak on it because it's not my place. So we have
Right.
a different way of operating in our community that isn't. We don't necessarily always readily adopt the colonizer's way of being in the world. So there is a risk of even feminism as an idea imported that Black women take up white women's projects and we become subjects of, subsets of them, of course. And
100%.
yeah, we know the violence of white feminism. So yeah, white women have ruined everything as well. So they've wrecked feminism. But so I wouldn't say I am concerned with gendered violence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned with the way in which Black men are dehumanized and emasculated. I am
Mm-hmm.
concerned with the hyper criminalization of Black men and women, and I understand the different ways in the machinery which makes that possible. That excludes Black
Right.
men and human, that excludes Black women as women and human, that excludes Black children from even the category of children. I mean, in the state of Queensland right now, it's adult crime, adult time.
Absolutely.
Our kids aren't considered kids anymore. And so I'm concerned about all of those things. And I know gender has a role to play, but I'm concerned about men, women, children, non-binary. I'm a mother of a trans son. It and I guess I know there've been various waves of feminism, but I just feel that the more general understanding of feminism has excluded the people that I love,
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
and it's excluded the gendered violence that my
Mm-hmm.
Black husband and father experienced. Um, so I'm interested in gendered violence, and I don't know whether feminism captures that possibility for me at this
Right.
point in time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So all these Western conceptualizations, Chelsea, have their limitations, right? Anti-colonial thinking is looking really at our communities, our histories, our protocols, our traditions that we would have lost to the ship that arrived on our shores, and finding ourselves. So I think that answer you just gave is the guiding light, in that
I
direction.
mean, I do have to confess, I love Black men, but I also am deeply troubled by the way in which Black men benefit from the oppression of Black women. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and those that have fallen in love with the patriarchy and forgotten to love the power of a sovereign Black woman. Um, so there is that part of,
There's that part,
and
yeah.
I know as a Black woman, there are Black men who have benefited professionally from the racial and gendered violence that I've been subject to and actively, have put the foot on my neck in the course of my journey. And I've had to work out ways to have that conversation without demonizing my Black
Mm-hmm.
brothers. But I wrote this article once called "Beware the Black Man in a Tailored Suit," and it was about an experience where I'd been denied an opportunity, and the two Black men that were, part of the decision making didn't have a PhD, and it was about a research center. And so I wrote
Mm-hmm.
this article in thinking about this relationship, and uh, when I wrote it, it was a bit comical, but it was where I processing my, frustration. And I had all the sisters in my DMs going, "I know that guy. I know that guy," because they all knew that guy. Um,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It wasn't the guy I was writing about, but as Black women, we all know that Black man. who's betrayed us, who can have proximity to white women and white men in ways that black women can't, and who have been complicit in the violence that has been visited upon us, and that it is hard to grapple with that betrayal from black men and even other black women who, benefit from racialized and gendered violence and think that they're going to be, that it's not going to come back for them,
Mm-hmm.
as does. Bless.
Absolutely, 100%. That's very insightful, Chelsea. And coming to another question, now Senator Lidia Thorpe describes Australia, or to be precise, the unceded sovereign territories known as Australia, as a country with an identity crisis. Would you agree with this statement, Chelsea?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. If you look, if you think about the founding frame for this so-called Australia, the legal doctrine of terra nullius.
Mm-hmm.
How do you arrive at a continent full of black people
Full of black
and
people.
declare it unoccupied land or land belonging to no one? Like, that is it's original sin, it's the original delusion of the formation of this national identity. And its desire to wipe from the landscape black bodies, and it's still committed to that
Mm-hmm.
project through, hybrid incarceration. But and we saw with the Cronulla race riots some years ago. At Federation, I think that the first raft of legislation was ultimately for a white Australia. This obsession with a white national identity, when walk around my neighbourhood of Anala, it's not white. And we watch
Mm-hmm.
TV, but you've got to look at floors of Parliament, it's largely white, but it's not representative of who this country actually is. But this nation is
Right.
still obsessed. It's just always hilarious, but also violent, but hilarious, that you tell people to go back to where they come from when you didn't come from here. Like, what kind of
Mm-hmm.
delusion do you have to live in to espouse that? And it's such popular ideology in this place, and this, the myth of the white Australia, this country hasn't let go of that idea. And there's the Cronulla race riots is one example, but also Australia invented offshore detention centres.
Mm-hmm.
Australia welcomed white South Africans to Australia long before Trump did. Like, we are world leaders in racism. We developed the model for apartheid South Africa under the Protection
Mm-hmm.
Act in the state of Queensland. So it has an identity crisis, but by the time the colonisers came here, they had refined the model for Indigenous dispossession and were so effective at it. But uh, a- and it's hilarious to me. I find it hilarious that they are so insecure, despite all this violence, all this power, that you could still be so insecure in who you are. We grew up in a house where
Mm-hmm.
you never forget who you are and where you come from, and there's pride in that. And to see this as a nation be so threatened by non-white bodies,
Exactly.
in just the everyday encounters. We've got neo-Nazis doing protests outside New South Wales Parliament. Um, and they're worried about the scholars doing an anti-racism forum at the start of the year. Like, we were under attack and questioned
Exactly.
whether we were racist, but we're happy with the neo-Nazis marching down the street. We've got these anti-immigration rallies led by immigrants. Like, and I always say to people, like, Blackfellas have never organised a rally around, fuck off, we're full, go back to where you come from. We ask, where do you come from? Who's your mob? How do we
Mm-hmm.
connect with you? So we've always been a people that have been inclusive, that want to form relationships,
Right.
that our existence is not dependent upon another group's erasure. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't imagine what it is to walk in the world where your existence is dependent upon raising so many others.
Exactly.
Like, what a weak identity.
What a weak identity. Exactly.
And that's why they have to exercise such violence.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, it's,
Absolutely.
I don't get the cheek of it. Like, we know even like, live and work on someone else's country, I've got to behave a certain way. And that's not, I don't
Mm-hmm.
resent that, begrudge it. That's how you behave. It's like you go to someone else's house, you're a guest, you behave properly. And these colonizers came over to civilize us, but they're the most uncivilized people in the world.
Exactly. Exactly. Everywhere they went, it's the same disaster. Absolute disaster. So what you said is priceless. It's
Yeah.
they're the most uncivilized people in the world, and then
And it's
they blame the
self-hatred.
indigenous
You have to
people.
really hate yourself so much to be able to
Exactly.
enact that kind of violence against another group of people, against other human
Mm-hmm.
beings, that your humanity allows you to exclude people from the category of human.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I interrupted.
100%. No, that's fine, Chelsea. They make colonized people hate ourselves as well. So I know for a fact in Sri Lanka now, one of the largest Sri Lankan communities outside of Sri Lanka is in Australia. And some of those people, they also live in a bubble. So they're from middle class Sri Lanka, English speaking. They've been trained, they've been brainwashed to, I'm not saying everyone, of course,
No.
there are people who have done the work, but there's an alarming majority of people who come to a place like Australia and they try to acquire a certain proximity to whiteness, right? And they're the people who would say, oh, there's an immigration issue in this country, and approve that. There is something in their soul that has been destroyed, right? Something really bad has been done to them. Self-respect or dignity or basic human values, all those things are lost to them in that experience of expatriation or immigration. So that's another reality.
Absolutely, and that's where I'm forging communities with settlers of colour. And what can we learn from Blackfellas about the refusal to get accepted, to seek acceptance? What settlers of colour can
Mm-hmm.
learn about being solidarity with Indigenous sovereignty. It's not to feel sorry for us, but to learn
Mm-hmm.
from us about how to exist in this place. To take the cautionary tale that we can tell you about this place, that your entry here is always conditional. As long as you're the model
Exactly.
migrant, but the moment there's something that, and I remember, I think there was a comic who said, I'm only as Australian as my next achievement.
Mm-hmm.
That for people of colour in this place, your class may give you one rung higher on the racial hierarchy, um, but it's not going to protect you. It's not going to save you or your children. And I understand
Exactly.
for some of a certain generation, there is about, survival and this idea of needing to provide for your family and thinking that that's the best thing. Um, but the children of that generation who have to deal with the violence of whiteness in the school, who are being told, don't worry about it and just get your good grades and withstand. I've seen the violence of that. And how they find community with other black fellas then, who give that reassurance of going, yeah, no, fuck them,
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's more work to be done around forging solidarities with settlers of colour. I know there are a number of settlers of colour in the colony here that find strength in the work that I do, or community through the things that
Oh,
we do,
bless.
which is really, really lovely. That we've all been indoctrinated, and to think back, and I'm seeing it with, it's sort of the second generation, second generation of kind of going, hang on, I know we've been taught this, but I don't know, this doesn't sit right with me. That I'm having to step
Right.
over other people in order to exist. Not so, yeah. And also, you have these little moments where, that spark up to go, oh, this is the country you live in. I mean, that white South
Mm-hmm.
Africans find peace in the colony here tells you
Right.
how bad racism is in this place, how ingrained and accepted, and how that they, um, uh, yeah, um, have, come here in droves. Um, that's a bit frightening, I think, and it should be frightening for
Very
settlers of
frightening.
colour. Um,
Absolutely.
And I remember we used the quote of a Brisbane Black activist in the symposium as we tried to forge a community of anti-racist practice that foregrounded Indigenous sovereignty. And it was Dennis Walker who said, they come for us today, they'll come for you tonight. And we have to
Right.
remember that you might step over that one, one rung higher, but you're going to be next.
You're going to be next.
Class is not
Exactly.
going to
So,
protect you. It will not protect you. Absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah.
Self-determination or collective liberation, that's what's going to protect us and help us build the right kind of solidarities to keep ourselves safe. And Chelsea, we are coming towards the end of our conversation, and you are one of the strongest voices out there for self-determination. Now, Senator Thorpe and many others have highlighted the necessity of a comprehensive treaty for the indigenous peoples or the indigenous nations of the unceded sovereign territories known as Australia. So, what are your thoughts on the prospects of a treaty? Your thoughts on potential roadblocks, potential challenges, and the necessity of a different type of governance? Because a lot of people sideline the fact that what we know as the Commonwealth of Australia, it's a colony, right? The British sovereign is the head of state. So that doesn't work for Black people. That doesn't work for Indigenous people of the land who have been subjected to several generations of atrocious violence. So the treaty is the least they could potentially offer. And a lot of people on the other side of this would say, oh, treaty is something excessive. But no, actually a treaty is a basic act of justice, a basic gesture of justice. One could interpret it that way. What are your thoughts on the potential of a treaty, on the potential of a different form of governance for this land?
Yeah. Look, because I was during the referendum campaign, I was in the Black Sovereign No group and with Senator Thorpe. And we had lots of interesting discussions about, the alternatives at various forums. And during that time, I made clear I'm not in treaty camp either. And we had in the state of Queensland, there was a proposition for treaty in Queensland itself, which in the aftermath of the referendum and a Conservative government coming to power, they just wiped the whole Truth-Telling Committee and treaty process. But in that state-based treaty, it was really about a rebranding of government service delivery to Indigenous peoples. There was not a real transference of power.
Right.
So there is the state is using the term treaty, which doesn't have the same significance as people imagine it to be. I can't speak for Victoria because I haven't been involved in that process, but it certainly was different to the state of Queensland, and more substantive, particularly even in their truth-telling inquiry. Treaties are always broken by colonisers. And I do understand that there are levers that can, it's not no one suggests that the treaty is the end, it's the start, and, about creating levers. I'm more interested in this one because the violence of settler colonialism in this country has been immense. And our people have been dispersed over and over again. And I'm really interested in the first steps towards and investing our energies towards nation building. And because it's through nation building, then nations have a position of authority to be able to then negotiate. At the moment, certainly in the state of Queensland, negotiations were between who were the chosen leaders by the state, who weren't representing the nation. They had made it in their careers via their occupation. So to me, this is about Indigenous nationhood, and we've got hundreds of nations across this continent. And how do nations decide what they want for their people, and including those who are now calling their land home, and what does that mean for each of those nations? But we need a process of nation building in order for there to be any kind of meaningful negotiation. So I'm more interested in that, and I think that's why I focus my energies and my intellectual work, community work on community building, on doing work primarily with Black people about how we understand ourselves to help then what's the Black critical consciousness that underpins
Right.
the work that we do and the leaders that take up and do the work that they're meant to do. So for me, it's like, now how do we build our people up first for whatever fight or negotiation we're going to take up, but it's going to be on our terms first, not because
Right.
we felt we had to make some concession and trade-off. So we can't talk about our sovereignty if in our being we are not sovereign. If we have not returned to what does it mean to operate on our own terms, not I'm the most articulate and diplomatic with the state. We don't need people who are loved by the state. We need our best warriors at that negotiating table.
Absolutely.
And right now, the voices with government are people who have whose occupation has given them leverage, but it hasn't come from their nation.
Right.
And I think
Exactly.
that's where we've got to switch that, return back. So
We have to
how do we
switch
build
that,
Black
yes.
infrastructure, Black leadership infrastructure? Because the Howard government back in some 20 plus years ago, we had a body called ATSIC, and it was elected by Blackfellas, a leadership infrastructure that was national. At local level was voted in to then state and national representation, and we were on the international stage bringing attention to Indigenous rights, and it was because that organisation was so powerful that it was abolished. So for me, our concern for our people is how do we build Black infrastructure in this country,
Black
independent of
infrastructure.
the state, to then go, okay, now what's our strategy? How do we go on this? Because there's just too many of us that are agents of the state. And this idea of treating it has become just another name for a new service delivery model that doesn't transfer
Absolutely.
any power.
100%. So, Chelsea, that brings us to a good point to conclude our conversation. In liberation work, it can be any form of liberation work, Indigenous justice work or racial justice work, or work that happens under a critical feminist banner. Sometimes one step forward can mean two steps back. Sometimes we come across so many obstacles, so many challenges on the way. So I'm sure you've had your share of challenges as well, and you shared some insights on some of those issues, some of those challenges, some of those concerns in this conversation. So my last question to you is, to a young person watching this, especially to a young woman watching this, who is interested in public life, who is interested in advocating for her community, but can you share some thoughts about how to face some of those challenges? Put one step forward, you have to sometimes strategically take a step back or two steps back. How do we stay strategic and at the same time committed to our struggles in the kind of work that you do?
I think letting go of the idea of progress and mountaintop moments. We have this imagining of justice and success that is kind of like the end of a race. And there's no end to this race until we've made
Right.
pass. And maybe it's not a race. Maybe it's a journey. And maybe that no that we felt as a door close, that I know there are times ancestors closed the door for me because I was not meant to go there. I was not meant to be there. I know that I'm meant to be where I am right now. I know that. I didn't plan it.
Right.
So letting go of some of our own expectations we put on ourselves because, of course, we've been taught to be 10 times better and do all the things, and our self-worth is bound up in productivity and da-da-da-da-da. Maybe if we let go of it and allow ourselves to just, and I hate the word journey because it's overused, but you're in this for the long haul. And whenever things go wrong, which is frequently in my life, professionally mostly,
Yeah.
just to be clear,
Mine too.
when things go wrong, and I always say to the team, what's our learning from this? What do we take from this? We don't sit around and talk for too long, and we do emotions and feelings, and we do have time for tissues and to express and feel, but then it's dry them eyes. Okay, what's the learning? What are we taking from this? What's the gift we're given here? My greatest learnings have come from the biggest hits, and it's made me so much stronger for the bigger fight that was ahead that I didn't know I was going to come up against. And what I find is that I can't escape the fight. I can't escape the resistance against me. I mean, if I did, it meant that work I'm doing is not doing anything because I'm not a threat to anybody. And
Yes.
I had to navigate and understanding how power works, but also know my own power. I had to understand violence in a very different kind of way, and the violence that I was subject to. And I had to realize that the bigger the hits that I was copying was because of the greater power people saw me possessing. Sometimes when we have these things go against us, we go, why me? What did I do? And how can I avoid this in the future? And it's like, oh no, that means you're powerful. When institutions have to summon all their resources and have all kinds of meetings and all kinds of strategies to hide the violence that they're visiting on you, that took them a lot of energy because you have power.
You have power.
And you have power. And so in every fight, you can never forget your own fucking power. You're allowed to feel the hit, but not for too long. And take the gift of learning, because I just look at everything that happens as training for the next fight that I never knew I was going to be put up for. And I do believe that, things happen in certain ways. And, we can't talk a lot about spirit in the academy, but I know, I don't have hope, but I have faith. And I know that things happen for a certain reason that at the time I may not know, because I'm not the all-knowing self and letting go of that. I might not know everything, but I'm taking the gift of learning wherever I can find it, and just manage that ego. The ego sometimes can get
100%.
that ego could, and we all got to check our egos because we all got them. And there's sometimes go, is that my ego or is I got to let this one go? So yeah, that's a few of my little learnings from.
Oh, that's really, really, really precious, Chelsea, the thoughts you shared there. And so if there is one final take home from this conversation, it's to know your power and to sit in your power and to be very conscious of your power as you navigate these systems, right?
And don't be afraid of what your power
Don't be afraid.
represents. And in a way that's not egotistical, like, not power like I'm powerful. When I think about the embodied power, it's not a power that's witnessed because it's exercised over somebody else. It's a power that's embodied. And people feel it. And some people want to raise it. Some people want to take it. Some people want to extract it.
Yes.
And if you know your own power, that doesn't mean you're powerful over it. Like, we all have power. What is your power? And just stand in it and don't let anyone distract you from remembering that. And whatever that is, we all got different things that we are gifted with. And when I think about my power, it's not in relation to someone else's, because I'm not thinking about a hierarchy of where I sit in relation to someone else on that way. I know we all have power, and I love, I've just had to really become comfortable standing in my own power, but I also love helping others to see their own power. That's fun to watch.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Helping others to see their own power is a very important part of our collective work, right?
Oh, I mean, I never thought, and I've had more opportunities to be able to support other people, and I'm just like, I love that. I love, seeing our academics get their own independent research grants to do their work. I love seeing victims of racial violence find their voice and just fight back, whatever way they want to choose to do it. And this is the thing you always talk about is that we've got to find joy in the fight, joy in the injustice. And there is
Absolutely.
so much joy in that, and you've got to pay attention to those moments and hang on to them, because they'll sustain you for the next bit of injustice to get through it, to keep up that fight.
Exactly. Exactly. Basking in that joy and taking pleasure in that joy is very, very important for our collective struggles to be sustained. On that note, Chelsea, this has been a beautiful, beautiful conversation, a very insightful conversation, lots of gems in this conversation. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Consortium for Intersectional Justice, thank you for joining us today. And more power to you, Chelsea. More power to you in
And you
doing
too.
the work that you do.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Okay, Jade.